So I have a couple of changes, and I've tried to make my scene a little bit more interesting. So this is my doing the homework, but even this is very mediocre and fast compared to what I expect you to complete. So I wanted to make sure that I had examples of animations, so I had to build 2 more animations. One of the animations that I built is this bicyclist, and the wheels spin. The pedals spin and the legs follow. So I built that animation, and when I move the circular drive, that slows that down, all the way down to almost 0 or completely 0, and then speeds that up quite a bit to something like that. So that's one of the things that I did. And then I, as you know, built my own custom handle. And I added a sun so that there'd be a bit more shadows, and that helps a lot. I should probably replace this with an actual tabletop so that these don't look like they're flying off the side. And then finally over here, I have a hover button that when it is pressed all the way down, plays one part of the animation, and when it's pressed again, plays a different part of the animation. And you can wait for however long amount of time it is that you need. You can see over here in the bottom left, the animator controller is set up with just one trigger named Next Animation, and this transition and this transition both happen when that trigger is set. And so every time you hit the button, it calls the trigger again. And this one just has exit time back to idle, which is an empty state. And so every time that I press the button down, it triggers the animation again. So, one thing that I got wrong in the last video, it relates to the button. I said that the button effect was the thing that we changed, and it's actually not. I was noticing that even when I deleted button effect, it still was building flowers, you may remember, and that's actually because of this flower point game object here, which has a button example script, and this is the way that Valve suggests that you build your script. So you have a reference to the hover button, and then you have the prefab that you want to create copies of. And if we look at this code, they work a little bit differently than what we're used to. So in Void Start, they add a listener, which is part of an event system, and it's similar to the user interface, like the regular user interface sliders and buttons. And we haven't learned about this yet, so I just copied and pasted this code into my own. And then, so to read this, the hover button that we have, on button down, listen for when that happens, and then when it does, run this script, or this method. And in this case, it is a regular method called regular method called on button down. It accepts one parameter, and in this case it does one thing, which is a bunch of creating a copy and then scale it up, and we don't have to do any of that. We can just have something like this. So I have a reference to the animator, I have a reference to the button, the hover button, and then a string name. I'll be giving you this script. A trigger name, which is the name of the trigger that I'm triggering in my animator. There's that line, on button down, add listener, on button down. And then here is the code, which is essentially if animator does not equal null, set the trigger with the phrase next animation. And this should actually be changed to trigger name. So now that I've got it working, finally, I can get rid of some of those debug.logs, but it essentially does one thing. It does accept a hand from hand. It doesn't do anything with it, but we can at least have access to it, and it runs that way. So I will be including that script in the assignment module. And I just attached that script to the button itself down here. You can see the button effect, which we want. I took it out in the last video, but I put it back. And then we have an animator, and then we have a button, and then the trigger name, which we could change here to whatever else, but in this case we want to leave it as next animation. And finally, I was running into issues with the on button down for the hover button script. I would do something like on button down and on button up, and it would have this none hand. I think you might have seen me question, what is that? Why isn't it in the other one? And that's because what I should have done is go to button effect and then dynamic hand up here. So on button down and button effect on button up. Button effect knows how to dynamically change what the hand is based on which hand it's is pressing down on it, or whether it's the fallback hand from the simulator. And so that's the change there, is going not to the bottom down here, but up to the top, the dynamic parameters. Okay. So I'd like to show off the circular drive, because I also built a script for my circular drive. So this circular drive test has a linear mapping map, which I think I showed off in the previous video, a boolean for whether or not we're dealing with the bicyclist or not, and then a serialized field for the animator. And that's the old code, this.transform.rotate. Otherwise, we set this animator.speed to the map.value times 4. So if the map.value is 0.1, then the speed of the bicyclist is 0.4, because we're multiplying it times 4. If we got rid of this, it would just be a 1-to-1 ratio, but if I wanted to speed it up past 1, it would go faster based on that speed. And that's all the code for the circular drive test. I amended that. If you remember, earlier I had a cube that was spinning in the background, and I just deleted that because I didn't want it in my scene. Yeah, okay. So that's all I've got. Good luck. I hope you're able to build some extra stuff. If you have questions, let me know. Talk to you later.